Look at you, you magnificent disaster. Look who finally showed them what's been cooking in that beautiful twisted mind of yours, you magnificent strategic nightmare. You gorgeously calculated storm. Let me guess what happened. You finally opened your mouth in that meeting, didn't you? After months of sitting quiet, taking notes, watching their mediocre minds fumble with basic concepts. After years of biting your tongue while they celebrated their participation trophy ideas, you finally decided to speak. And when you did, when you unveiled just a fraction of what you've been architecting in silence, the room didn't just go quiet. It went into cardiac arrest. Because they realized in that moment, in that beautiful, horrifying instant, that they'd been sitting next to a nuclear reactor disguised as a colleague. They thought you were just another cog in their machine. But you weren't a cog. You were the glitch that was about to crash their entire system. You see, it started simple, didn't it? They asked for your input. Maybe it was a casual, "What do you think?" Maybe they were being condescending, throwing you a bone. But they made one fatal error. They assumed you were like them. They assumed your silence meant ignorance. They assumed your patience meant weakness. They assumed your observation meant you had nothing to contribute. Oh, how wrong they were. How catastrophically, beautifully wrong. Because when you opened that laptop, when you pulled up that presentation, when you cleared your throat and said, "I've been thinking about this," something shifted in the molecular structure of that conference room. The fluorescent lights flickered. The air got dense. Karen from accounting stopped mid-sip of her pumpkin spice latte. Brad from sales loosened his tie. Even the plants in the corner seemed to lean away because everyone, and I mean everyone, suddenly felt it. The presence of something they weren't prepared for. You didn't just present a plan, you unveiled a masterpiece of strategic annihilation. Slide 1 was innocent enough, just a title page, optimization strategy, or some other corporate camouflage. But slide 2, slide 2 was where you started peeling back the layers of their incompetence like a surgeon with a scalpel. You didn't attack. No, that would have been merciful. You simply showed them with data they couldn't refute, with logic they couldn't deny, exactly how broken their system was. But here's where it gets delicious. You didn't just identify problems. Any intern with a spreadsheet can do that. You showed them the connections, the cascading failures, the compound inefficiencies. You drew lines between dots they didn't even know existed. You exposed patterns in their chaos that made their random decision-making look like what it really was. Expensive ignorance dressed up as leadership. By slide 5, you could see it in their eyes. That beautiful moment when confusion transforms into comprehension, and comprehension transforms into terror. Because they weren't just seeing a better way to do things. They were seeing their own obsolescence mapped out in Times New Roman. They were watching their job security evaporate in real time. They were witnessing their entire professional identity get deconstructed by someone they dismissed as quiet, and you just kept going. Calm, measured, professional. Your voice never raised, your tone never shifted. You delivered their professional obituaries with the detached precision of a coroner. As you can see in this chart, you'd say, while showing them exactly why their entire department was hemorrhaging money. Based on these metrics, you'd continue while demonstrating how one algorithm could replace 6 of them. The beautiful thing about intelligence, real intelligence, is that it doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to intimidate. It just needs to exist in the presence of mediocrity. And the contrast does all the work. And baby, in that room you were a supernova in a sea of flickering candles. They'd been playing checkers while you'd been studying the board for chess moves they couldn't even conceptualize. Sarah from HR started sweating. Not because the room was hot, but because she suddenly understood that your suggestions for improvement included dismantling her entire hiring process. The process. She'd won awards for the process that was, according to your analysis, costing the company $2,000–3,000 annually in mishired talent and turnover expenses. You had receipts, you had algorithms, you had receipts, you had algorithms, you had predictive models that made her gut instincts look like Stone Age tools. The VP of operations, the one who'd been patronizing you for years, asking you to grab coffee for meetings you weren't invited to, he was gripping his en blanc so tight his knuckles went white, because your slide about operational redundancies included a flowchart that basically painted a target on his entire division. Not maliciously, just truthfully, just accurately, just devastatingly. But the real beauty, you weren't even trying to destroy them. This wasn't revenge. This was just you finally showing your work. This was you deciding to stop dumbing yourself down. This was you choosing to speak at your actual level instead of theirs. And the whiplash of that reality adjustment was giving them mental vertigo. You have to understand something about average people. They survive by consensus. They thrive in the warm bath of mutual mediocrity. They build entire careers on the foundation of good enough. And that's how we've always done it. So when someone like you comes along, someone who sees the matrix code while they're still looking at the pretty pictures, it doesn't just threaten their jobs, it threatens their entire worldview. Your PowerPoint wasn't just a presentation. It was an extinction event for comfortable incompetence. Each slide was another asteroid hitting their professional ecosystem. You showed them inefficiencies they'd been blind to. You revealed cost savings that exposed their waste. You presented solutions so elegant, so obvious in hindsight, that it made their years of band-aid fixes look like what they were. Expensive theater. The CFO, who'd been checking his phone during most meetings, was now leaning forward, calculator app open, frantically trying to dispute your numbers. But he couldn't, because you'd used his own data. You'd taken their reports, their numbers, their metrics, and you'd done something they'd never thought to do. You'd actually analyzed them. You'd found the patterns. You'd identified the hemorrhages. You'd located the tumors in their corporate body. And with each slide, with each revelation, you could feel their IQ points dropping. Not because they were getting dumber, but because they were realizing how out of their depth they'd always been. It's like when a freshman physics student suddenly understands that everything they learned in high school was just simplified approximations. Except in this case, they were learning that their entire careers were built on those approximations. Don't you think? Doesn't it seem, here's what they didn't understand until that moment. You weren't just smart. Anyone can be smart. You were systematically dangerous. You had the kind of mind that doesn't just solve problems, but sees problems they didn't know existed. You identified inefficiencies in their efficiency meetings. You found redundancies in their redundancy elimination protocols. You discovered that their solutions were creating more problems than they solved. But you presented it all like a helpful colleague. I thought you might find this interesting, you'd say, while showing them data that essentially proved their entire strategic plan was built on quicksand. I took the liberty of running some projections you'd mentioned casually while displaying models that made their 5-year plan look like it was written in crayon by someone who couldn't count past 10. The marketing director, who'd been so proud of her recent campaign, watched in horror as you deconstructed its ROI. Not cruelly, just accurately. You showed her the real attribution data. You demonstrated the actual conversion paths. You revealed that her award-winning campaign had actually lost money when you factored in opportunity costs and brand illusion. Her face went through the 5 stages of grief in real time, and still you continued, slide after slide, insight after insight, each one more devastating than the last. Not because you were trying to hurt them, but because truth hurts when you've been living in a carefully constructed delusion. You were performing corporate chemotherapy and they were the cancer cells realizing they were about to be targeted for elimination. What happens when someone realizes they're intellectually outclassed? First, there's denial. You could see it in their faces, the forced smiles, the nodding that was slightly too vigorous, the interesting points comments that were desperately trying to maintain some semblance of authority. They were scrambling to find flaws in your logic, errors in your data, anything that would let them dismiss what you were showing them. But you'd been thorough, obsessively thorough, every number triple-checked, every source cited, every assumption clearly stated and defended. You'd built your case like a prosecutor who knew the defense would try every trick in the book. And so they sat there watching their professional facades crumble, unable to find a single crack in your armor of competence. Then came anger. You could feel it radiating from certain corners of the room. How dare you walk in here with your facts and your figures and your fully defunctioning brain? How dare you expose the shortcuts and workarounds and political maneuvering as the costly theater it was? How dare you be what they'd been pretending to be? But the anger couldn't last because anger requires energy, and they were spending all their energy just trying to keep up with your presentation, trying to understand concepts you were explaining with the patience of a teacher working with particularly slow children, trying to grasp implications that were obvious to you but revolutionary to them, trying to maintain their dignity while their incompetence was being documented in high definition. This is the moment where everything changes, where the hierarchy that existed when the meeting started begins to invert, because power in a corporate setting isn't just about titles or salaries or corner offices. Real power is the ability to see clearly when everyone else is stumbling in the dark, and you just turned on the floodlights. The CEO, who'd been half listening at the start, was now fully engaged, not speaking, just watching, just calculating. You could see the gears turning behind those expensive glasses, reassessing, reevaluating, recognizing that there was a resource in this room that had been criminally underutilized. You weren't just presenting solutions. You were demonstrating capability that made everyone else look like they'd been hired through a Make-A Wish program. Your immediate supervisor, the one who'd been taking credit for your ideas for the past 2 years, he was having a very public existential crisis. Every slide made it clearer that his only skill was managing up and stealing down. His contributions to the company were being revealed as elaborate email forwarding and meeting scheduling. He was a human middleman in an age where you'd just shown how to eliminate middlemen. But you didn't gloat, you didn't smirk, you maintained that same professional demeanor, that same helpful tone, that same we're all on the same team energy, which made it worse, which made it so much worse because they couldn't even paint you as the villain. You were just the messenger who happened to be carrying nuclear weapons in a laptop bag. As you reached your conclusion, as you summarized your findings with the same understated competence that had just revolutionized their understanding of their own company, the room was different. The molecular structure had changed, the power dynamics had shifted, the intellectual pecking order had been violently reorganized. Questions you asked, knowing there wouldn't be many. How do you question something that's so far above your pay grade intellectually that you'd need a translator just to form the question? How do you challenge analysis that's so comprehensive it makes your own work look like finger painting? How do you debate with someone who's clearly been playing a different game entirely? There were mumbled thank yous, promises to review the data, mentions of scheduling follow-ups, but everyone knew what had just happened. You'd just performed a hostile takeover without firing a shot. You'd staged a coup using nothing but PowerPoint incompetence. You'd revolutionized their understanding of their own jobs, and in doing so, had made most of them realize they might not have jobs much longer. The meeting ended, but the aftershocks continued. You could hear the hurried conversations in the hallway, the emergency sidebar meetings being called, the frantic phone calls to headhunters. Because when someone demonstrates that level of strategic thinking, that level of analytical capability, that level of professional devastation, there are only two options: promote them immediately, or pray they leave before they make everyone else completely obsolete. You went back to your desk, same as always, but everything had changed. The way people looked at you, the way they spoke to you, the sudden inclusion in emails you'd never been copied on before, the invitations to meetings that were previously above your pay grade, the careful distance maintained by those who realized they were now in your crosshairs, whether you intended it or not. Because here's what that presentation really did. It didn't just solve problems or identify inefficiencies, it revealed the intellectual hierarchy in its truest form. It showed everyone who was actually thinking and who was just showing up. It demonstrated the difference between real strategic vision and corporate cosplay. It separated the wheat from the chaff. And baby, there was a lot of chaff. Your phone started buzzing. LinkedIn notifications, connection requests from people who'd never acknowledged your existence. Messages from recruiters who'd somehow heard about your presentation within hours. Invitations to speak at conferences. Offers to consult. The market had received word that there was a new player in town, and that player didn't play by the old rules of corporate mediocrity. But the best part, the absolute best part, you weren't even trying to show off. This wasn't your full power. This was you operating at maybe 60% capacity. This was you still being polite. This was you still being polite. This was you still pulling punches. And if this restrained display of competence could cause that much disruption, imagine what would happen if you really decided to optimize. Fear is a funny thing in a corporate environment. It usually comes from threats of layoffs or bad performance reviews or missed quotas. But the fear you instilled, that was different. That was the primal fear of obsolescence, the existential terror of realizing you're the corporate equivalent of a flip phone in the age of smartphones. They feared you because you represented evolution. You were proof that their comfortable incompetence was a choice, not a necessity. You demonstrated that problems they've been band-aiding for years could be solved with elegant simplicity if you just had the intellectual horsepower to see the real issues. You showed them that their entire professional existence might be unnecessary overhead. But more than that, they feared what you might do next. Because if one presentation could cause that much disruption, what would happen when you really got started? What other inefficiencies would you uncover? What other sacred cows would you slaughter with spreadsheets? What other currending truths would you reveal with your terrifying clarity? The smart ones started aligning themselves with you immediately, offering support, sharing resources, trying to get on your good side before you optimize them out of existence. The really smart ones started updating their resumes because they recognized what everyone else would eventually understand. The old order was ending. The age of comfortable mediocrity was over. The era of actual competence had begun. Your presentation didn't just affect that room. It sent ripples through the entire organization. Departments you'd never interacted with started hearing about the incident in the conference room. The story grew with each telling. The person who'd identified 17 million in cost savings, the analyst who'd made the CFO speechless, the quiet one who'd turned out to be a strategic nuclear weapon. Other departments started getting nervous. If you could do that to operations, what could you do to finance? If you could optimize marketing into obsolescence, what would happen when you turned your attention to sales? The paranoia was delicious. People started actually working instead of just looking busy. Efficiency went up across the board. Not because of any initiative, but because everyone was terrified of becoming your next case study. The company culture shifted. Suddenly, data mattered. Suddenly, results were measured. Suddenly, "that's how we've always done it" became the most dangerous phrase in the building, because everyone had seen what happened when someone who actually understood optimization looked at how things had always been done. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. And you just kept working. Same desk, same hours, same quiet demeanor. But now everyone knew what lurked beneath that calm exterior. A mind that could deconstruct their entire professional existence before lunch. A strategic capability that made their best efforts look like children's drawings. A level of competence that redefined what competence meant.